Well, last week I talked about not jumping the gun, rushing into Thanksgiving and Christmas, and not being ready for all of that. And after the snow, maybe you're ready now. It sure feels like Christmas out there. But we're going to spend one more week looking at the harvest images in the Bible. Now, normally we don't like to be associated with things like fruits and vegetables. If someone calls you a fruitcake or a nutcase, you don't say thank you. And it's really not a compliment when they say that you're a couch potato. So please hear me out. And don't be offended when the Bible calls you a first fruit. Yeah, that's what it says. It says right there in James chapter 1 that you are a first fruit. Don't be deceived, dear friends. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. He chose to give us birth through the word of truth, that we might be a kind of first fruits of all that he created. God has given us the gift of becoming first fruits. But what does that mean? Well, if you were here last week, we talked about how back in Leviticus, the Israelites were told to bring the first and the best of their harvest and offer it to the Lord, the first fruits of the harvest. And we also talked about how it's not easy for us to relate to that kind of thing because there aren't many here among us who are farmers. We aren't farming in this church, but God is. And in a strange way, we not only offer our harvest to God, but we are the harvest. Listen to Jesus' parable of the wheat and the weeds, or as it is called in the old King James Version, the wheat and the tares. It's found in Matthew chapter 13. Jesus told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. When the wheat sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. The owner's servants came to him and said, "Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where did all these weeds come from?" "An enemy did this," he replied. The servants asked him, "Do you want us to go and pull them up?" "No," he answered, "because while you're pulling up the weeds, you may root up the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At that time I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burned, then gather the wheat and bring it into my barn." Here's a parable for anyone who has ever had a garden, because it talks about weeds. It seems that no matter how careful you are to have just the right soil and to plant the right seeds, what comes up are weeds. And it is really a pain to get down on your hands and knees and to pluck all those things out. And sometimes it's even impossible. If you plant in rows, yeah, you can go through there and get some of the weeds. But if you scatter the seeds like the farmers did in Jesus' day, then you can't go and get out the weeds. Because in doing so, you'd trample on the wheat and you'd pull up just as much wheat as you would weeds. And so the farmers back then would let the wheat and the weeds grow together, knowing that at harvest time everything would get sorted out. And when the harvest comes, the farmer cuts it all. The wheat is gathered into the barn for safekeeping, and the weeds are gathered up and burned so they don't spread their seeds and disease. Now, of course, there's probably not many of you gardeners that are burning your weeds these days. It probably violates some sort of city ordinance. So what a lot of people do is compost. Compost all of these things that we collect out of our garden. And in that way, we actually accomplish the same thing as burning. In fact, it's sometimes called cooking your compost. Did you know that a well-formed compost pile will actually heat up to as much as 170 degrees all on its own? If you have the right mix, which starts with a lot of carbon kind of things, the brown stuff, the leaves, the straw, corn stalks, And if you add just the right amount of green stuff like grass clippings and food waste and green weeds, and then give it some moisture and some oxygen, then the soil microbes will generate enough heat in that compost pile to kill the weeds and the seeds and the diseases. And so in a way, even in our gardens today, the weeds are burned and the harvest is brought inside for safekeeping, just as it was in Jesus' parable. But unless you're a gardener, what do you care? What do we care what the farmer does with his weeds and harvest? Well, I care because Jesus is not really talking about fruits and vegetables here. He's talking about us. God is the farmer and we are the harvest. Listen to his explanation in Matthew 13, verse 36 and following. Then he left the crowd and went into the house. His disciples came to him and said, "Explain to us this parable of the weeds in the field." And he answered, "The one who sowed the good seed is the Son of Man." This is the title that Jesus uses when speaking of himself. Jesus. "The field is the world, and the good seed stands for the children of the kingdom. The weeds are the children of the evil one, and the enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the harvesters are angels. As the weeds are pulled up and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin, and all who do evil. They will throw them into the fiery furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. But the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear." God has planted, and God will gather in. And right now, it may not look like it matters whether or not you believe in God, whether or not you have a connection with the planter. Right now, when you look at the world, it seems like it doesn't make any difference whether you follow God or not, just like the wheat and the weeds are all growing together. And there's a lot of stories, like the story of Abby. Abby was a single mother of 2 kids, who in spite of her exhaustion and working 2 jobs to make ends meet, managed to get her and her kids to church on Sunday mornings. Not only that, she volunteered at the Crisis Center, and she helped out with the Girl Scouts. And whenever someone was going through a hard time, Abby was there for them to listen and to pray. Many people called her an angel. Then one day the doctor called to tell her that the test showed cancer. She bravely went through surgery and chemo and managed to beat the cancer. But of course she missed a lot of work during that time, and she wasn't at her best. So when her company had to downsize and to choose between her and another woman whose only responsibilities was to come to work sober enough, the company dismissed Abby, and she lost her job. Now that kind of story is repeated over and over again. Bad things happen to good people, and good things happen to bad people, and it doesn't seem to matter much whether you follow God or not. But the parable of the wheat and the weeds tells us that there will be a time when things are sorted out, when God will take his harvest home. So each of us has a decision to make. Do we want to be a part of God's good harvest and be gathered home with the Lord, or do we want to reject the Lord and be a weed? It may not look like there's any difference right now. They all go together in the same field. And even the Bible says that God causes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust. Or snow might be the Minnesota translation. You know, the snow dumps on all of us. Doesn't really matter how you live and whether you know the Lord or not. We all get dumped on with the snow.